Hey, fifth graders. All right, so this is going to be an interesting lesson for you. I think you can all handle it, but it might be a little bit weird. So this is going to be lesson 12, which is understanding integers. And the essential question is, how can you use positive and negative numbers to represent real world quantities? Sometimes this is fun and sometimes not so much. And sometimes it makes sense and sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. We'll cover a lot of this. Some of these, honestly, I even kind of looked at this and was like, whatever. But first of all, let's talk number lines. Okay, so you guys are probably used to a number line where you start with 0 here and you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? Perfectly obvious. However, notice this arrow going this way. That means this number line actually continues in this direction after 0. And so I'm going to erase these so I don't have to redraw the thing. But let's say that we had 0 right here. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 here. Well, this direction is going to be negative numbers. So we're less than 0. So -1, -2, -3, -4. Okay? So let's take a look at unlocking the problem. So you have a number line that shows 0 and whole numbers, right? You guys have used that. You can extend the number line to the left of 0 this way to show the opposite of the whole numbers. For example, the opposite of 3 or positive 3, because we could look at these as being positive numbers, right? So the opposite of positive 3 is -3. For those of you guys who are fans of, say, football or something like that, think of it as gaining yards versus losing yards, right? Running back runs for 3 yards, okay? So he gained 3 yards. But sometimes he gets tackled behind the line of scrimmage and he loses 3 yards. For those of you who don't like football, I realize that was probably just gobbledygook that I said. But the idea is the same, all right? You can gain something, but you can also lose it in the same direction and go below what you had previously. So if we're talking money, right? Maybe I sold you this marker for 3/4, right? So I gained 3/4. But then maybe I had to, or instead of me selling the marker, maybe I had to buy a marker for 3/4, which means I lost 3/4. So I would go negative from where I had started out. So let's do this. Example number 1. The temperature in Fairbanks, Alaska was 37 degrees below 0. Write an integer to represent the situation. So decide whether the integer is positive or negative. Well, it's 37 degrees below 0, right? So if we were writing this number line up and down, this would be 0. And here would be positive numbers, the direction you want to go with your temperature. This would be like plus, 30 degrees, plus 40 degrees, right? Going this way is what we get familiar with every winter, which is going to be negative temperatures. Okay, so here we are going into the fun direction where we're happy during the spring and the summer. Here's the bad direction where we're sad during the winter, unless of course you like snow and cold, in which case maybe you're happy going down this way. Personally, I think anything above that 0 number is much more pleasant. Anyway, so -37 would be somewhere right about there. That's 37 degrees below 0. So the word below tells me that the integer is negative. That's the things that you're supposed to fill out there in step 1. Step 2, write the integer. Well, it'd be -37. So the temperature in Fairbanks was -37 degrees. Example 2. The koala bears, I'm sorry, so this is a football team, gained 11 yards on a football play. Write an integer to represent the situation, and then tell what 0 represents in that situation. So in this lesson, they're going to ask you what does 0 represent over and over again. So sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that's really obvious, and sometimes it's kind of weird. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. So step 1, decide whether the positive integers or negative integers represent. So a positive integer in a football game represents yards that were gained, right? So they got yards. They moved the ball the right direction. Negative integers would represent yards that are lost. That would be when they get tackled behind the line of scrimmage. So what does 0 represent? Well, 0 represents yards were neither gained nor lost. In other words, it'd be the line of scrimmage if you wanted to use the more technical term. But basically it means that if you gained 0 yards, you also lost 0 yards. So you just got nothing. You just stayed right where you were originally. Okay, let's take a look at some of these. 1, 2, 3, and 4, I think you can probably figure out. Just remember that the word profit means that you got something, you added to it. Number 5 says a passenger's jet flew at an altitude of 34,000 feet. So this is an airplane, okay? And it flew at 34,000 feet. So how would you write that integer? Well, a lot of times we actually just write positive integers just as regular numbers, but you could also put the plus sign there just to make sure that it's clear that you are positive 34,000 feet. What does 0 represent? Well, 0 in this case, right, you're 34,000 feet. This is where it gets a little technical. Because when we talk altitude for airplanes, they are 34,000 feet above sea level. You might say, oh, it's above ground level, but they're not 34,000 feet above the ground because the ground is doing this sort of a thing. So when they talk altitude, it's actually sea level. As long as you say something like the ground or 0 feet above the ground, it's just on ground level or sea level. Either of those are fine. This is math, not dealing with that, so don't stress. Number 7 is kind of a weird one. So Craig was 20 minutes early for his appointment. Well, first of all, what does 0 represent? Well, if we're talking about comparing to his appointment, right? He's 20 minutes early to his appointment. So we would probably say that 0 represents the time of his appointment. But then what is the integer? So he's 20 minutes before that, but what does before mean? Well, we'd probably say that this is negative, right? If you think about like NASA, if you ever watch like a ship taking off, a rocket taking off, right? They count down T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. So time minus 10 means 10 seconds before the time. Well, in this case, it's 20 minutes. So it'd be negative 20 minutes is what the integer should be there. That covers most of this stuff. Yeah, these are all, I mean, some of them are kind of weird, but for the most part, they're not too bad. Really, I think the most confusing part is when they ask you what does 0 represent, because a lot of times you're going to say, well, like it just sort of is what it is. Like you kind of know in your head, but it's hard to put it into words. So yeah, it's not too bad. On the homework, these all look pretty straightforward too. So cool. All right. So that was lesson 11. I'm sorry, that was lesson 12. Lesson 13 is going to be all about algebra. Scary. Oh, you'll be okay. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully it makes sense. If it doesn't, as always, feel free to contact me. Have a great day.